three speakers. Myself, I am Joanne Morin from the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection. I am the Deputy Director of the Air and Climate Division. We will also be having Mark Wirt from MassDEP. He is the Branch Chief of Planning, and he will be speaking to the mapping tool and cumulative analysis, data analysis. And Mike Woodman, who is the Branch Chief of the Permitting Section, and will be speaking to the risk assessment tool. So I'm going to get started. I'd ask, we are going to stop for questions periodically during the webinar. It would help if you put your question in the chat function as opposed to the Q&A function. It's just a little bit easier for us to see it. So I'd appreciate that. Thank you. Okay. So the CIA regulation stems from the 2021 Climate Roadmap statute, which directed DEP to conduct the stakeholder process and propose regulations within 18 months requiring cumulative impact analysis in certain air permits. The statute did not include additional guidance beyond this requirement. We conducted a robust stakeholder process from August of 2021 through April of 2022, in which we held 6 sets of public stakeholder meetings. We filed the draft regulations at the end of 2022 and held public hearings and a 90-day comment period. The final regulations were promulgated on March 29th, and they were applied to permit applications submitted on or after July 1st. Along with the final regulations, we've published on our website guidance and tools to assist permit applicants conducting a cumulative impact analysis, or CIA. These can also be used by members of the public to assess community conditions such as asthma rates or the location of regulated air facilities in their area. Most of the information in this webinar is taken directly from the guidance that's on the website. MassDEP developed 3 tools to assist with conducting a CIA. One is a mapping tool that provides a map of all the EJ populations and also provides the data required for the CIA. And that's what Mark will be speaking to later on in the presentation. And an air toxic risk assessment screening tool, or MATRIS, for estimating cumulative air toxic risks. And Mike Woodman will be speaking to that later on, as I said at the beginning of the webinar. We will describe each of these in quite a bit of detail at that time. The CIA regulations are designed to protect environmental justice populations from the harms of air pollution from proposed projects in or near EJ populations. This includes meaningful public involvement of potentially affected EJ populations, assessing existing community conditions so that those conditions can be taken into account in the permitting process, and analyzing cumulative impacts of added air pollution. The regulations apply to any new facility that requires an air quality comprehensive plan application, or CPA. That is the name of our permit applications. And these are ones that are located in or near an EJ population. This includes non-major, or you can call them minor, sources of air pollution, and major sources, which are the largest sources of air emissions. For non-major sources, a CIA is required if it is within 1 mile of an EJ population. For major sources, a CIA is required if it is within 5 miles of an EJ population. We receive very few major CPAs. These will be less common. We receive about 20 to 30 non-major CPAs each year, but they are not always within 1 mile of an EJ population. A CIA also is required if an existing facility that already has a CPA, or comprehensive plan approval, requires a new CPA due to a project that would increase criteria and/or toxic emissions by at least 1 ton per year in aggregate, excluding greenhouse gas emissions. A CIA is not required for a comprehensive plan approval that would decrease emissions, but would temporarily increase emissions. For instance, a project that is replacing an old fossil fuel combustion equipment with more energy efficient equipment may cause a temporary increase in emissions until the old equipment is removed. This temporary increase does not trigger a CIA. Examples of projects that will require a CIA include process emission increases greater than 10 tons, new fossil fuel combustion devices above a specified energy input based on the type of fuel, such as natural gas boilers greater than 40 million BTU per hour, and other specific categories such as incinerators, engines, and turbines. Emergency engines do not require a CIA, and non-emergency engines that are restricted to 500 hours per year do not require a CPA. Major source thresholds include an increase in potential emissions shown here, such as 50 tons of nitrogen oxides, or NOx, or volatile organic compounds, or VOCs. These are larger projects, such as a large power plant or a large university power generation or heating system. So I'm going to stop for a moment and see if there are any clarifying questions about applicability. I'm not seeing anything in the chat. Is there anything in the Q&A? Good. Okay, great. Then I'll just continue on. Once a project meets the applicability for CIA, the CIA includes the steps shown here, and these are taken directly from the guidance. The first is a public notice and involvement. Step 2 is the assessment of existing community conditions, which is where the data is gathered. Step 3 is air quality dispersion modeling of criteria pollutants. Step 4 is a cumulative air toxic risk assessment, which is new to our regulations for permit applications. An evaluation of the proposed project's impacts ties together all the data that's been gathered. An applicant must develop a CIA report and submit it with the comprehensive plan application. The public must be notified and can provide comment on the permit application. When MassDEP issues a draft permit decision, then a formal comment period is held for 60 days. The air quality regulations include a definition of environmental justice populations based on the 2021 climate law. You can find all of the environmental justice neighborhoods or populations on the map included on the EEA, our Secretariat, environmental justice websites, as well as in the CIA mapping tool. Nearby environmental justice populations are those located within 1 or 5 miles of a project seeking a comprehensive plan application. The term neighborhood from the definition of EJ population also is defined consistent with the climate law. Other new definitions include air toxics, definition of CIA, and proposed project as a way to refer to actions that may trigger a comprehensive plan application. So are there any questions on definitions? Okay, I'm not seeing any. So we'll keep going. Public notice and involvement is a key component of the regulations. At least 60 days before submitting an application, an applicant is required to notify the DEP regional office, the EJ director, and local officials and local environmental justice populations. This notice must include a fact sheet about the proposed project. After the notice, the applicant must meet with the DEP regional office to discuss the project and their plans for community involvement. Note that the applicant will need to reach out to the MassDEP prior to providing this notice to obtain a list of community groups to notify. The applicant must provide meaningful public involvement opportunities to seek input on the proposed project and the CIA that will be conducted. Outreach to the environmental justice populations and opportunities for their involvement should be tailored to the specifics of the proposed project and the nearby environmental justice populations. The guidance provides examples of the types of activities that should be considered, such as community meetings, informational websites, and so forth. Translation of documents should be done as appropriate for the community. Public meetings should be held at times a day that the public can more easily attend, like in the evenings or at 2 different times, like during the day and in the evening, as we've done with this webinar. And we did with the stakeholder process for the draft regs as well. The CIA report that the applicant will develop must include all of the public outreach conducted, as well as a summary of public comments and written responses. Therefore, the applicant should document public involvement activities that are taken. Concerns raised by the public should be incorporated into the assessment of community conditions and addressed. Any questions at this point? Okay, seeing none, I will continue on. The CIA regulations require an applicant to assess existing community conditions, and this is done by gathering data for 33 indicators for all environmental justice block groups near the project. Applicants must include data from 33 environmental, health, and socioeconomic indicators in their assessment, which becomes part of the CIA report. MassDEP has developed tools to make getting these data as easy as possible. The final CIA report should include data tables, maps, and a descriptive text describing existing community conditions. Applicants must also include in the report concerns raised by the environmental justice populations or local officials during the public involvement activities. So, what are these indicators? They are a set of statistics carefully selected to, quoting the rule, characterize existing pollution sources, health vulnerabilities, and other stressors that could be I always have trouble pronouncing this word, exacerbated by increased air emissions from the proposed project. Looking at these numbers can help you tell if an environmental justice neighborhood may have more air pollution or may be more vulnerable to air pollution. Applicants only need to report the indicators for EJ block groups within the 1 or 5 mile radius. So first, in this list of indicators from Table 1 of the regulations are the indicators for air pollution or environmental stress. These come from EPA's efforts to gather emissions and model air pollution over the entire country. These first three come from EPA's EJ Screen tool. 3 more come from EPA's AirTalks Screen tool. And then the final one, our own GIS team calculated impervious surfaces for the entire state. We include this last indicator because the amount of impervious surface has been linked to increased heat and associated health effects. Think of it as the inverse of green space. Note that the CIA reports will compare each indicator for each block group to the state percentile rank for these indicators to show how far each block group is from the middle values of the state. You'll be hearing a lot more about how to do that later in the presentation. Next, applicants will map and list regulated facilities that fall in the radius around their project. These are listed in the report, whether they are in an EJ block group or not. For the purposes of this rule, regulated facilities are certain types of facilities that fall under environmental regulations. So, as you can see here, facilities, for example, air facilities that are those that file regular emissions reports with MassDEP. And these include both major and minor air facilities. The other type of facilities here include facilities regulated by both state and federal agencies. For health indicators, we have data from our own Department of Public Health. So first we have asthma, elevated blood levels. We have low birth weight and premature death. The indicators are averaged over the most recent years available. These further indicators are from the Center for Disease Control, or CDC. We have the COPD, which is chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and coronary heart disease among adults. So CDC gets these estimates based on their behavioral risk factors surveillance survey, which the initials are BRFSS, if you are familiar with that at all. The survey is enormous. It's completing more than 400,000 adult telephone interviews each year across the country, which makes it the largest continuously conducted health survey system in the world, and that's why we use the data from that resource. Note to access existing conditions, we are comparing the health indicators to the rate for the entire state. The way the CIA reports will do that is to show each block group compares to the state rate by reporting its indicator as a percentage of the state rate and highlighting those that are particularly higher than the state rate for each indicator. So we also gather some socioeconomic and demographic statistics as indicators for the EJ block groups. So the first three are from our secretariat's, EEA's, environmental justice determinations, which are based on census data. The next two are from EPA's EJ screen, the percentage of children and the elderly, which again are census data from the American Community Survey. And then to identify facility-based, potentially vulnerable populations, we look at 5 types of facilities within the radius: schools, both elementary and secondary, long-term care facilities, public housing, larger child care facilities, and prisons. As we have said, the indicator data comes from a wide variety of sources: DPH, which is the Department of Public Health, the EPA, the Center for Disease Controls, and a variety of systems, such as our own Secretariat's, EEA's environmental justice data, EPA's air tox screen, EPA's EJ screen. And they also include custom data sets created by Massachusetts Department of Public Health and Massachusetts DEP's GIS unit. Finding and presenting the data would be complex. However, to reduce the burden on applicants and to make this data available to environmental justice neighborhoods as well, we have gathered all the indicator data applications needs in 2 places. One is an indicator spreadsheet posted on the CIA website and a mapping tool developed by our GIS team and also available through the CIA website. We're going to do a step-by-step explanation of those tools later in the webinar. These 2 resources provide the exact data applicants need to do their report, thereby making a seemingly difficult task relatively simple. I'm going to just, the indicator data, I'm going to give just a few examples of the tool, of the mapping tool, but not go into as much detail as you'll see later. So how do you select the data needed for your particular project? The health and environmental indicators should be compiled for all environmental justice block groups within 1 mile or 5 miles of a major source, as we said at the beginning of the webinar. Some of the EJ block groups will likely be part in and part out of the radius. You do not have to include EJ block groups with less than 5% of their area within radius, and we'll show you an example of that shortly. Note that you also do not have to include health and environmental data for non-environmental justice block groups. However, for sensitive receptors and regulated facilities, that's different. You should include all sensitive receptors and regulated facilities within the project radius, even if it's not located in an EJ block group. To select your indicators, you start with a mapping tool. And the most useful part of the mapping tool is a custom data retrieval feature called the Near Me report that will gather the data needed for your specific project radius. So this is what the mapping tool looks like when you first click on it. It's an online application created by our MassDEP's GIS team that gathers data needed for an assessment of existing conditions and displays it on one map. A link to the tool is on the MassDEP CIA Cumulative Impact Analysis website. So here's the screen where you start. We're going to review the main functions of the tool now, and then, as I said before, we'll later provide a step-by-step explanation. The mapping tool displays the layers of data needed to start assessing existing conditions for the CIA report. It's custom built for CIA, so you're not seeing extraneous information. Excuse me. The colors indicate the EJ block groups. You'll see the light brown here, the blue, and so forth. And the objects on the map are either sensitive receptors or regulated facilities. Applicants need to provide maps for all of these things in their report, and the tool makes it easy. The focus of the CIA is the area within 1 or 5 mile radius. So, and the app includes, there we go. And the app includes a custom report tool that draws the required radius and then generates a report of what the map elements are in the radius. Here is what the report generator in the mapping tool gives you. It shows how many of each element from each layer you have in your radius. Notice that there are many environmental justice block groups in this radius. The report gathers data on the blocks and other elements that are within the radius. So you can see that in that circle. Here, for example, you can see there are 17 environmental justice block groups. Below that, you can see there are 3 schools and then the numbers for all the other map elements. The download button in the Near Me report will provide spreadsheets listing all of the map elements within the radius, including the 17 EJ block groups in this example, and their corresponding census tracts. You will use the EJ block groups gathered by the report to find the other indicated data you need from the accompanying spreadsheets. The CIA guidance specifies 3 types of maps and tables needed for assessing existing community conditions that the mapping tool provides. It gives you maps and a list of each of the environmental justice block groups and census tracts in the radius around your project. It gives you the maps and a list of all regulated facilities, and it gives you the maps and a list of all sensitive receptors. The guidance also requires that socioeconomic, demographic, health, and environmental indicator data, as we presented earlier, be provided in tables for each block group or tract. Those data are in the CIA spreadsheets, but the list of EJ block groups and tracts from the mapping tool are the keys to retrieving those data. So, I lost my notes for this one. I don't know why. But you can see here that the mapping tool shows this block group in the red circle, and you can see it here on the report. And then you use that as the same ID on this table where you find the row corresponding to your block group. You can lift data right out of the spreadsheet, rearrange it a little bit for readability, and then display it as shown in this example for socioeconomic and demographic data. The guidance shows examples of how to find, present, and discuss each type of indicator. Later on as I've said it a few times, you'll see the step-by-step instructions on how to manipulate that number and create this table. Some of the mapping tool layers are older and can be incomplete. Community input, that is one reason why community input is so important, and it's required as part of the CIA process. Community input will provide the final quality check on the existing conditions data in a CIA report. It may uncover additional sensitive receptors, facilities, or other issues that weren't captured by our data sets and map layers. The applicant should add this community input into the CIA report and respond to questions and comments raised in that process. So are there any questions at this time about assessing existing community conditions? Okay, I'm still seeing no questions, so we'll continue on. As is already required for many comprehensive plan approvals, are CPAs, an applicant must conduct air dispersion modeling of criteria pollutants to demonstrate that emissions from the proposed project do not violate the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, or NAAQS, as they're called. The applicant should submit a modeling protocol for review by MassDEP. As required for modeling any air emission source, include potential emissions from the project from all existing emission units, nearby significant sources, if any, and background pollutant concentrations from MassDEP's air monitoring network data. Consult MassDEP staff to identify nearby permitted air sources if their emissions are significant, as identified in the MassDEP air modeling guidance. In addition, add in any significant vehicle emissions from the project. This is an additional element in the CIA air dispersion modeling. A figure must be included that shows model pollutant concentrations from the project and ISO+ around the facility and in the closest EJ population. So this is an example from the CIA mapping tool. The red circle represents the 1 mile radius around the facility, which is indicated by the red pen. The nearby air permitted sources are circled in blue, and these should be included in the modeling if their emissions are significant, as defined. Again, we have this how to do that through the air modeling guidance we also have on our website. This is an example of a graphical modeling result that are produced by AirMod, and that is the air modeling software that is used and recommended by EPA and used for air emission modeling. So when it's produced by AirMod after air dispersion modeling is performed, this slide shows the model pollutant concentration ISO+ that surround the emission source, which is usually such as a stack, indicated within the X, and the rectangle represents the facility's fence line. The maximum pollutant concentration is by the red number at the fence line. Model pollutant concentrations are micrograms per cubic meter. Using the data from the air dispersion modeling, the applicant should show representation of the modeling results as part of the CIA modeling report. In other words, the modeling pollutant concentrations represented by the ISO+. This figure should show the fence line modeled concentrations and the maximum modeled concentrations. The modeled maximum concentrations of the nearest sensitive receptor would need to be shown as well and displayed if different than the fence line. So as I mentioned, MassDEP recently updated its air quality modeling guidance. The guidance reflects EPA regulations and guidance and is available on the MassDEP website. Applicants should work closely with MassDEP modeling staff prior to submitting a modeling protocol. MassDEP has also processed and posted on our website meteorological data to be used for dispersion modeling. The map shows the locations of the air surface stations represented by triangles and the upper air MET stations represented by blue balloons. Applicants should download the zip file containing 5 years of surface and upper air MET data. Currently, the MET data is for the years 2017 through 2021 and will be updated annually. And we're working on that right now to include most recent data. Is there any questions about air dispersion modeling? Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. So applicants must also conduct a cumulative air toxics risk characterization using the Massachusetts Air Toxic Risk Screening Tool, or MATRIS, or conduct their own refined risk characterization. The MassDEP air permit, the comprehensive plan approval, will only be approved provided the cumulative cancer risk does not exceed excess lifetime cancer risk of 10 in a million, and cumulative non-cancer risk does not exceed a hazard index of 1. The CIA report must include a graphical figure that shows the calculated risk levels for air toxics of particular concern, and especially in the nearby EJ population. So Matrix is a risk screening tool that will help the applicant determine the potential risk of the air toxic emissions from the proposed projects. The applicant can input facility emissions, stack height, distance to nearest fence line receptor or nearby receptor in the EJ population, and if available, can add in emissions from nearby significant air sources. So Matrix will calculate the cancer and non-cancer risk using built-in dispersion factors. The screening tool also includes an option to choose a rural or urban dispersion factors, and guidance on the screening tool can be found in the README worksheet, and guidance on the emission factors can be found in the emission factors guidance worksheet. Alternatively, an applicant can conduct their own air dispersion modeling using AirMod and input source-specific dispersion factors into the screening tool. And then the third option for the applicant is to not use the tool, but perform a refined risk characterization instead. Matrix uses the 95th percentile concentration for determining 1 hour and 24-hour default dispersion values. However, the applicant should use the maximum concentration for site-specific dispersion values when inputting model concentrations into the tool and when conducting a refined risk assessment. Average concentration should be used for annual dispersion values for all applications. So Mike is going to go into this further in a little bit, but there are 13 worksheets that make up Matrix, of which 3 are input worksheets, 3 are output, and 7 are reference worksheets. The input worksheets are used to input the project information, emissions, and stack height to determine the appropriate default dispersion factors that will be used, or site-specific dispersion factors, as I said earlier, can be used based on source-specific modeling. So the README file worksheet includes a brief description of all the worksheets. The emission factors guidance worksheet provides general information on selecting emission factors. And we do have an update worksheet, which is used to track revisions to the tool. The tox values worksheet includes the 237 toxicity values used in the tool. So this is the output of the tools. The summary worksheet shows whether the project meets the required risk levels. The meets means the project meets or is below the risk limits. The refined means a more detailed analysis is required, which again could be used including source-specific dispersion factors in Matrix or conducting a refined risk assessment. So any questions at this time about air toxic risk characterization? Okay, seeing no questions, I'll continue on. The final CIA report must evaluate and describe how criteria air pollutants and air toxic emissions could affect existing environmental and public health conditions in nearby environmental justice populations. It should also describe any mitigation measures the applicant proposed to reduce or minimize the cumulative impacts. If the project went through MEPA, the applicant must consider relevant analyses and findings from the MEPA review process, including any finding of disproportionate adverse effect. The overall evaluation should address how potential air emissions could affect existing health conditions, air quality, and related health outcomes in environmental justice populations. This is a qualitative analysis. It should also describe mitigation measures, if any, that would be implemented to reduce or minimize the impacts of the project. This slide is from the CIA guidance and shows the types of questions that should be addressed, such as are there particular health indicators that are consistently high in the environmental justice block groups, and how potential emissions could affect those health indicators. Are there any questions about evaluation of cumulative impacts? Okay, so I'm still seeing no questions, so I will continue on. The CIA report should be written to be understood by the community and should include an executive summary and description of the public outreach, assessment of existing community conditions, Results of air dispersion modeling and air toxics cumulative risk characterization, as well as evaluation of the project cumulative impacts and all supporting documentation, which can be included as appendices. The applicant must notify the public and all interested parties within 3 days of the application being submitted to MassDEP. To provide nearby environmental justice populations have the opportunity to read and comment on the CIA and the comprehensive plan approval application at the same time that MassDEP conducts its review, which is an additional opportunity for comment compared to our non-CIA process. After its review, MassDEP will issue a proposed permit decision for a formal 60-day comment period, followed by issuing a final decision to approve or deny the comprehensive plan application. This completes the overview of the Massachusetts Cumulative Impact Analysis regulations. We're now going to go into a step-by-step process on the mapping app and matrix. So let me stop here and see if there's any questions before we move on to Mark Wert's explanation of the mapping app. Okay, I'm still not seeing questions. So Mark, if you would like to continue the presentation. And if there were any general questions as well, we would consider them now too, but I'm still not seeing any questions. Okay.
All right, very good. Thank you. And good evening. In this section, we'll show you how to use our mapping tool and indicator spreadsheets to obtain the data required for assessing existing conditions in a cumulative impact analysis report. So, just to review, how do you select the data needed for your particular project? The health and environmental indicators should be compiled for all EJ block groups within 1 mile or 5 miles per major source of your project. Some of the EJ block groups will likely be part in and part out of the radius. You do not have to include EJ block groups with less than 5% of their area in the radius. We'll show you an example of this shortly. Note that you also do not have to include health and environmental data for non-EJ block groups. However, for sensitive receptors and regulated facilities, this is different. You should include all sensitive receptors and regulated facilities within the project radius, even if not located in an EJ block group. So to select your indicators, you start with the mapping tool. And the most useful part of the mapping tool is a custom data retrieval feature called the Near Me report that will gather the data needed for the specific project radius. So here's the opening screen. The mapping tool is an online application created by the MassDEP GIS team that gathers data needed for an assessment of existing conditions and displays it on one map. A link to the tool is on the MassDEP Cumulative Impact Analysis webpage. Here's the screen where you start. There are many features available in this tool, but I'm only going to focus on what is needed for applicants to do their reports. You start with the project location. Here we will use the MassDEP Central Regional Office as our example location. You then click the Near Me report widget down in the lower left-hand corner, and that will bring up the Near Me report tool. Enter the facility address. In this case, 8 New Bond Street is our example. Pick your address from those offered. Take care though, this tool is tied to a worldwide geographic system, and so the first address you see might not be yours, it might not even be in the country. Note that you can use an address, but if the facility is large or the address is imprecise, you can click the coordinates button and enter a lat long if you like instead. In most cases, the address matched map location for the facility will be adequate as the location of the proposed project. However, this may not be the case for proposed projects on large properties. In such cases, applicants should select a location on the map using the coordinates button that corresponds to the location of the proposed project rather than the address map location that they get using an address. or the geographic center of the facility, or any other commonly used coordinates for the facility as a whole. They should pick the location of the proposed project in those cases. If a facility or proposed project is larger than 50 acres, has a widespread set of emission release points, or is best characterized as an area source, then the applicant should contact MassDEP for guidance on exactly how to select the location for their particular project. Once you've selected the address or coordinates, the tool automatically adds a 1 mile radius circle to your map. But you can do any radius you wish, including the 5 mile radius for a major facility, by changing the number and/or units of distance here. In the Near Me report box, you can click the Zoom to Location icon to quickly get closer in, or you can use the plus/minus buttons or in the upper left corner, or roll your mouse wheel, whichever is most convenient. But this will get you right into your particular radius and show everything that you're needing. When you zoom in closer, you'll be able to see all the layers on the map. The tool is customized for the cumulative impact analysis report, so you are seeing just the layers you need to start assessing the existing conditions for your report. The colors here indicate the EJ block groups, and the object on the maps are either sensitive receptors or regulated facilities. Applicants need to provide maps for both sensitive receptors and regulated facilities in their report, and the Near Me report tool makes this easy by providing maps that can be screen clipped to include in the report. But the Near Me report tool does more than just draw a circle. It gathers elements within the circle, and this is what makes the tool particularly useful for your report. Click the Generate Reports button that you see here, and here's what the generator on the mapping tool will give you. It shows you how many of each element from each layer you have within your radius. Notice that there are many EJ block groups in this example radius. The Near Me report gathers data on the EJ block groups and other elements that are within your radius. Here in this example, you can see there are 17 EJ block groups. Below, you can see there are 3 schools and then the numbers of all the other map elements. The zeros you see mean that there are none of that layer in your radius. Let's focus on the first layer for now, which is the environmental justice block groups. You will use the environmental justice block groups gathered by the Near Me report to find the other indicator data you need from our spreadsheets. So you can expand each layer by clicking the plus button. Here we will open the EJ block groups layer. And the report generator will show you data on each block group that is within the radius. You can do the same for any of the layers. For this example, you can see the population and EJ criteria for the block group. Importantly, this data includes the GeoIDs for each block group, such as this one. You can match these block group GeoID numbers to those on the map. And you can match those GeoIDs to the data in our indicator spreadsheets. That is, the GeoIDs are the key for getting the rest of the data for your report. What you also need for the report is a list of all the elements in the radius. Click the download button to get a set of spreadsheets with all the sensitive receptors and regulated facilities in the radius ready for the report. This download button will include the EJ block group data as well. But sometimes block groups have only a small portion of their area inside the radius, such as this one, which is the block group ending in 4011, which you can see here on the expanded list. So what should you do? Here's how the guidance says to handle such block groups. Here again is the area in the radius and the block group 4011, as you can see on the map, and then again in the expanded list of environmental justice block groups. To start, calculate the percent of the block group area that is in the radius. The Near Me report gives you the area of the block group that is in the radius, down here in the lower corner, in this case, 0.29 acres. And the total block group area is also given in square meters. Convert to acres and calculate the percent. In this example, it'll turn out to be 0.33% of the area of the block group that's actually within the radius. Block groups like 4011 here, with less than 5% of their area in the radius, can be excluded from the report. You should, however, include such block groups in the initial report block group table and note the percentage of the area in the radius, but after that, then they can be dropped from the rest of the report. Also, there will be non-EJ block groups that are within your radius, such as this one. Here we see a single block group that is not EJ. This block group will not be part of the cumulative impact analysis report. The mapping tool does not provide data to identify this block group or any other non-EJ block groups. You will need to list every EJ block group in a table in the report, and you will need a corresponding map to make it understandable for the public. The Near Me report gives you both the map of the EJ block groups and a spreadsheet list of the EJ block groups that you need for the tables. You can see both in this example. Here, a particular block group on the map we can use to illustrate how to pull the rest of the data from our spreadsheets. In this case, the block group ending in 1001. Because some indicators are given by block group and some indicators are given by census tract, you need both the 12-digit block group GeoID and the 11-digit tract ID. To get the GeoID, you just drop the last digit of the block group. The GeoID given in the for the block group given in the Near Me report spreadsheet. You can see for this example, the block group ending in 4001 is grayed out, as it had less than 5% of its area in the radius, as we showed in the previous slides. It will be dropped from the remainder of the data gathering. So now we have our block groups and tracks. The next step is to go to our indicator data spreadsheets provided on the Cumulative Impact Analysis webpage. But first, it might be useful to explain just a little bit more about those 12-digit GeoIDs for the EJ block groups. These are just the way the census puts all the location information into one number. They start with the state code, 25 from MA, then the county, then the tract, and finally the last digit is the block group. You don't really need to know all that to use them, however. Just remember that the tract is the block group without the last digit. You can then take any GeoID and find the data in our spreadsheets, whether by tract or by block groups. The indicated data are in several tabs of a spreadsheet file on the Cumulative Impact Analysis webpage. Here we have the socioeconomic and demographic indicator sheet. The sheets look daunting at first, but finding the data in them is actually relatively easy. You start by filtering down to your municipality, in this example, Worcester. Then filter for the block groups that you need. Here, the example is the block group ending in 1001 again. And then the results gives you the population, the EJ criteria, and further off to the right of the screen, it also gives you the demographics for the block group. You can then copy the rows right out of the spreadsheet, rearrange a little bit for readability, and you have your table. So here's our example block group again. The guidance shows examples of each map and table the applicants should include, such as this one. That was an example for block group data. So how do you get the data that only comes in a census tract? Most of the health data is only available by census tract, so you use the tract GeoIDs to pull the health data out of the health indicator spreadsheet, just as you did with the block group GeoIDs in the previous slides. Here for our example, the 12-digit block group ending in 1001 is shortened to the 11-digit tract ID ending in 100. Again, start by filtering on the locality, this time by county, which here is Worcester. Then filter by tract GeoID. And you will have the health data for your tract that you can copy into your report table. Note that you will need to copy out the state rates as well. Up here at the top, you can see the 2 state rates. Notice that some tracts have blanks for some indicators, low birth weight in this example. This usually means that the Department of Public Health has suppressed the data for this one tract due to small numbers to protect privacy. Again, the applicant copies the data from the spreadsheet into the report table. Here you can see the data for the tract ending in 100 entered into the example report table from the guidance. There's our tract ID. Note that in our example, only 6 tracts contain all of the 17 EJ block groups that are within the 1 mile radius. And you can see our example tract appearing there for each of the health indicators. Note that you need to include a column for the state rate and the percentage of state rate, bolding those values that are greater than 100% of the state rate. That is to say, they're higher. In this case, the tract rate for low birth weight is 146% of the state rate. Notice that where the data was blank in the spreadsheet, you label the report cell NS for not shown to indicate that DPH suppressed the data. The last health indicator is asthma in schools. Asthma is reported as the prevalence per 100 students, the percent. DPH collects the asthma data from school nurses. Therefore, asthma is reported by school, as shown here, and not by tract or block group. So this means asthma is handled somewhat differently. There are a couple of extra steps to get asthma data for the report. First, you have to find the schools that are associated with your EJ block groups. This includes schools that are near EJ block groups too, because they may serve children in those EJ neighborhoods. Those schools may not be within your radius. To make this easier, our GIS group created a table that matches every school that was in or near an EJ block group in the state. Nearby, that is to say what a school is when a school is nearby, we defined as within 1/2 mile of the boundary of an EJ block group. So if you know a particular block group, you can find all the schools that may be serving children in that block group. Since EJ block groups are often near each other, there'll be a lot of overlap, with single schools serving multiple block groups. But for the report, the school needs to be only listed at once. The spreadsheets still, again, make this fairly easy, as we'll illustrate in the next slides. As before, you start with your EJ block group GOIDs. In the indicator spreadsheet, you'll find a tab labeled Block Group -Schools, as shown here. Filter by your community, in this case, Worcester, then filter by your block groups. In this example, we are again looking at the example block group ending in 1001. And the list shows there is only one school in or near this block group, the Burncoat Street School. Note that other block groups have more than one listing in the table because they may have more than one school nearby them, in or near them. For example, the block group ending in 1003 just below our other example has 3 schools in or near it. These would be the Burncoat, Abbey Kelly, and Norback. Combine the schools for all of the block groups, and you will have a list of individual schools and school codes for the EJ block groups within the radius. Again, schools need to be listed only once. So now you have a list of schools. Then bring the list of schools to the tab labeled Pediatric Asthma by School. Here again, for our example, filter the community down for Worcester, then order the schools by name, and you will see the Burncoat School that was in or near the block group ending in 1001. Then you can copy out the prevalence for the Burncoat School, which is 29%, and the state asthma rate of 12%. And the prevalence of the Burncoat School as a percent of the state asthma rate is 233%. Copy all that into the report table for pediatric asthma in the EJ neighborhoods near the proposed project. Now, finally, the applicants will need to measure the distance from the proposed project to each school. And the mapping tool has a widget for doing that too. Up in the upper right-hand corner, click the Measure widget, and then click the Measurement tool for distance. Click once on the proposed facility, and then double-click at a nearby school. In this example, the school is a half mile, 0.52, and that's what would need to be put in the report table. Then you can click the Clear button and move on to the next school. Next, we move on to the environmental indicators. The air quality indicators are mostly available by track, and so the process for retrieving them is essentially the same as we showed for the health indicators. The environmental indicators are available in the indicator spreadsheet file under Indicators by Track tab. Here again is our example track ending in 100, and the PM 2.5 values for that track. In this case, note that none of the percentiles or percent of state rates for any of the tracks in this example are particularly high, so nothing is bolded. The guidance indicates that values greater than 100% of the state rate or the 95th percentile rank should be bolded and in the report tables to highlight those tracks for the public, but that doesn't apply in this example. There's one exception to environmental indicators by track, and that is traffic proximity. Our traffic proximity is from EJ Screen and is available by block group rather than track. And so you will use the block group GeoID to find the data in the Indicators by Block Group tab, just as with the environmental justice, socioeconomic, and demographic data examples from before. Here again is our example block group ending in 1001. So note there are more rows for traffic proximity because the values are available for all 17 block groups rather than just for the 6 tracks. Our example block group is well under the state average here, 46%, but several of the block groups are higher than the state average, and so you see them in bold in this table. Next, we'll take a look at sensitive receptors and regulated facilities. The existing conditions report portion of a cumulative impact analysis report must list the sensitive receptors and regulated facilities within the radius around a proposed project. The mapping tool provides these lists through the Near Me report widget in the same way it provided the block group numbers via spreadsheets you download. Clicking the download button on the Near Me report widget will generate a set of spreadsheets. In this case, it's showing you the expansion of the list for child care centers. And it's showing you that you have a population value for the child care centers, and this is what you'll want to include in your report. And this information will be downloaded when you click the download button. And similarly, other layers, the information for them will come down as well. If the map is too crowded in, for example, an urban area, you can display the sensitive receptors and regulated facilities separately in the mapping tool, and so capture separate maps for the report. For example, here we have only the sensitive receptor layers on to show them without the facilities to make it a little easier to see. To control the display on the map, you can use the Layers feature of the Map tool in the upper right-hand corner that allows you to turn on or off individual layers. Here we show only the sensitive receptor layers turned on, as you can see by the check marks. With this feature, you could also make a map of just schools or just regulated air facilities if that would make the report clearer. But sometimes there are receptors that appear to be just outside of the radius, like this one. So we want to use this example to call in this case, applicant's attention to situations where there's a sensitive receptor or regulated facility that appears just beyond the edge of the radius. Here's an example with a school that appears to be outside of the radius based on where the map is, the label is located on the map. But if you take a closer look, you find out that it is actually straddling the radius. In this case, we have a high school and a middle school campus together. In this example, these schools should be included in the sensitive receptor table. So applicants should examine the edges of the radius to make sure they are capturing these facilities that are really in the radius, even if the labels are outside. If there is a case where a very small portion of a receptor is in or on the radius, then an applicant can contact DEP before completing their report so we can advise them on that case by case. Here's what a table of sensitive receptors looks like in the report, showing in this example schools and long-term care residences. The table should indicate whether the receptor is in an EJ block group. However, applicants should not include all sensitive receptors in the, applicants should include all sensitive receptors in the radius, whether or not they are in an EJ block group. Details like the enrollment for schools or capacity for a child care center that are available in spreadsheets should be included in the table, as you see here. And where the Near Me report shows 0 sensitive receptors for a particular type, there should, the table should indicate that none is available. Again, there's another capacity, piece of capacity data. Similarly, here's the data for regulated facilities near our example project laid out as in a report table. As with sensitive receptors, the report table should note whether each regulated facility in EJ is in an EJ block group or not. And for air facilities, the applicant should indicate whether the facility is a major air source, has an operating permit, or is a minor source. Where the layer provides a facility ID, the table should also show that ID because it is key to looking up further information about a facility. Where the Near Me report shows no regulated facilities of a particular type, the applicant should also indicate that in the table so it's clear that none of this type of regulated facility were found in the radius. All right, then that is how you can construct the existing conditions, part of the report, from the tools we provided on the Cumulative Impact Analysis webpage. Do we have any questions on that process or the webpage or the mapping tool? I don't see any in the chat. So if anyone has any questions, they can put them in the chat. But if not, then Mike, you wanna go
Okay,
and take over.
right. Hey, thanks, Mark, and good evening, everyone. So applicants must conduct a cumulative toxics risk characterization, which is a new requirement in the permitting process. The following section provides an overview of the requirement and the Massachusetts Air Toxics Risk Screening Tool and how to use it. Matrix is a risk screening tool that will help the applicant determine the potential risk of the air toxic emissions from the proposed project. Applicants can input the facility emissions, stack height, distance to fence line receptor, nearby receptors, and, if available, emissions from nearby significant air emission sources. Matrix will calculate the cancer risk and non-cancer risk using built-in default dispersion factors. The tool includes an option to choose a rural or urban setting. Additional guidance can be found in the README and the emission factor worksheets. Alternatively, the applicant can conduct their own dispersion modeling and use AirMod and input site-specific model dispersion factors. Third option for the applicant is to perform a refined risk characterization as opposed to using the risk screening tool. Matrix uses the 95th percentile concentration for determining 1 hour and 24-hour default dispersion values. However, the applicant should use the maximum concentration for site-specific dispersion values when inputting modeled concentrations into the tool or when conducting a refined risk assessment. Average concentration should be used for annual dispersion values for all applications. There are 13 worksheets that make up Matrix, of which 3 are input worksheets, 3 are output worksheets, and 7 are reference worksheets. The input worksheets are used to input project information, emissions, and emission information to determine the appropriate default dispersion factors that will be used, or site-specific dispersion values can be used based on source-specific modeling. The README worksheet includes a brief description of all the worksheets. The emissions factors guidance worksheet provides general information on selecting emission factors. The updates worksheet is used to track revisions to the tool. The tox values worksheet includes the 237 toxicity values used in the tool. The tox value notes worksheet provides information supporting the inhalation toxicity values. Finally are the tables depicting the rural and urban dispersion values used in the tool. These values are dependent on stack height and receptor information entered in the tool. Each table contains 1 hour and 24-hour 95th percentile and average annual values used to estimate the air concentrations at the receptor distance selected. The emissions worksheet is where the user enters hourly chemical emission rates in pounds per hour and annual chemical emission rates in tons per year for each chemical found on the spreadsheet that is emitted or potentially emitted from each stack at the facility. The rates must be individually calculated and entered. The spreadsheet does not calculate one from the other. Brief guidance on merging stacks can be found in the README worksheet, and guidance for selecting emission factors is provided in the emissions factors guidance worksheet. The facility information at the top of the worksheet was automatically populated from information entered in the project information worksheet and will be populated in every worksheet. The worksheet has 237 air pollutants and room for 50 stacks or emission points to be entered, and a unique identifier can be substituted for each stack number. The dispersion worksheet is where the user first selects the rural or urban dispersion based on facility location. Next, the user inputs stack height and receptor distance. In this case, the distance to the receptor is the fence line. If the top portion of the table, the receptor distance is the distance from the stack to the nearest fence line, or EJ population. The stack height and receptor distance are selected using drop-down menus. Since the stack height is only modeled in 1 meter increments, round down to the closest value. For example, if the actual stack height is 2.8 meters, then select 2 meters as the stack height. Similarly, there are defined values for receptor distance, and the value chosen should be closest value that is less than the actual value. For example, if the actual receptor distance is 10.8 meters, then select 10 meters as the receptor distance. Alternatively, receptors from the automated lookup process can be overwritten by entering dispersion factors from site-specific dispersion modeling into the manual entry dispersion value rows. The tool will then calculate the 1 hour and 24-hour 95th percentile value and the maximum annual average values based on either rural dispersion tables or urban dispersion tables worksheet. If the applicant conducts site-specific air dispersion modeling, specific dispersion values can be entered as shown under stack 7. for maximum 1 hour and 24-hour maximum average annual values. The tool then populates the dispersion values below. The project information displayed has been carried through to this worksheet based on information entered in the project information worksheet. The concentration worksheet is an output worksheet and is where the 1 hour, 24-hour, and average annual air toxic concentrations at the receptor distance selected in the dispersion worksheet are calculated by multiplying dispersion factors by emission rates. The project information displayed has been carried through to the worksheet based on the information entered in the project information worksheet. The risk calculations worksheet is where the air toxics concentrations from the concentrations worksheet are used to calculate the acute and chronic non-cancer hazard quotients and the cancer risks for individual chemicals with reference concentrations or inhalation unit risks from the tox values worksheet. The project information displayed has been carried through to this worksheet based on the information entered in the project information worksheet. The tox values worksheet is reference information for the 237 air toxics. It's a list of inhalation health benchmark values used in the acute and chronic non-cancer and cancer inhalation risk calculations. Risk values are adjusted for early life exposures when appropriate. The summary worksheet compares the total hazard and risk calculated values from the air toxics emissions to the regulatory limits and shows whether the project meets required risk levels. The meets means the project meets or is below the risk limits. The refine means a more detailed analysis is required, which could include using source-specific dispersion factors in matrix or conducting a refined risk assessment. The CIA report should show a map that includes maximum cancer risk and hazard index at the fence line and the nearest sensitive receptor in the EJ population. The maximum cancer risk and hazard index don't have to be at the same receptor, but can be at different receptor locations. In this case, the facility is within an EJ block group, and maximum cancer and hazard index at the facility's fence line. In this example, the facility is not within an EJ block group. At a minimum, the screening tool should be used to calculate the risk at the nearest fence line location and at the nearest receptor location in the EJ block group. The applicant will need to prepare a graphical figure showing the risk in the fence line, the risk at the fence line, and the nearest EJ block group. So are there any questions on the risk screening tool? And I'm not seeing any. So let's move on to the end. And Joanne, you're muted.
No. We're happy to take any questions. If you've developed any, if you can put them in the chat at this time on any part of the presentation. But we thank you for attending and hope you found this helpful. Yeah, we will be posting one of these webinars on our website so you can rewatch it. I know it's a lot of information and a lot of detail, but it will be good for reference. So I am still not seeing, and you're welcome to unmute yourself and just call out if we're not seeing your questions, but I'm not seeing any. So we'll wish you a good evening and thank you for attending.